sunny day, a beautiful French village, a charming neighborhood sale, and a sweaty Englishman roped into manning a booth. From page one of Death and Wool, charm and wit vie for prominence, immersing the reader in the world of the Follet Valley series by Ian Moore. Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents Author Interviews, and welcome to you, Ian.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Sharon. Thank you.
I'm so glad we could work this out. So I'm gonna just go ahead and jump right into part of working this out was that I'm in Arizona and you're in France. So,
In rural France, yeah, dead center of France. Yeah.
so tell us why you chose to put your English protagonist in the French countryside.
It was actually a very simple decision. I live here, and Richard Ainsworth, the main character in the Folly Valley Mysteries, isn't a million miles away from me as a character. I'll tell you how he came about specifically is that Richard in the books he owns a kind of high-end bed and breakfast establishment, what in France they call a chambre d'hôte. It's just a B&B really, and he runs one in the Folly Valley, which is part of the wider Loire Valley. And for a time, I ran a high-end bed and breakfast in the Loire Valley in central France, and I hated every minute of it. And the only way I could kind of find any cathartic way of getting through it was to start writing books in which guests died. And and so that's how the whole series began, is that I wanted to kill the people who stayed on my property, but I could only do it vicariously through writing. Because if you actually kill your guests, apparently your TripAdvisor rating goes way down.
Way down.
So I
Yeah, it
had to
just
just stick it in a book.
plummets.
So that's how Richard ended up. The character ended up being in this area of France. It's so ripe for. There's so much history here that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, but also relatively recent as well. And it's I did quite a lot of reading of um, crime books set in France, of which there aren't that many that have been translated into English anyway. And it's just an area that just hasn't been used at all. When you think of how rich it is in terms of chateau, in terms of battles, in terms of its place in the Second World War. It's the center of wine growing. It's my particular village is the goat's cheese capital of the world. There is so much going on around here that you can use in any sort of mystery book.
And it is just all of that depth of the area comes through in your writing. Even though Richard is a little, he sighs a
He
lot.
lo- he loves it. I mean, I'm the same as well. I've lived here for 20 years, and I used to go before the first 15 years of living here. I was commuting back to England every weekend to work in the stand-up clubs in the UK. And I remember one weekend I went back and I was moaning, as I normally do, moaning about where I lived. And a friend just turned around to me and said, "You're in paradise. What is your problem?" And I realized that he wasn't far off being right. But I've given that kind of cantankerous love of the place to Richard.
Yeah, and it comes across beautifully. And actually, I'm going to kind of jump around in some of our questions. You mentioned stand up. Who were some of your inspirations for stand up comedy?
Do you know that's a really difficult thing to answer, and I'm not sure I had any inspirations as such. My love of comedy really developed through old films. I used to love Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, and I'd sit on my dad's knee if they were on a Saturday afternoon on the television. Sometimes they were, and I'd sit on his knee and watch them and just howl. I just loved the byplay between the two, and that kind of, in fact, that kind of character, that kind of Bob Hope character, that kind of um, coward, but lovable coward. Woody Allen took that on. Groucho Marx had that kind of idea as well. And for a while on stage, I tried to do a similar thing of this kind of this guy who just has no idea how to cope with the modern world. And I think that's where my inspiration came from. Because as for actual stand-up, I didn't. I saw what was on television, but there wasn't a great deal of stand-up on television, and stand-up never really works on television. And I hadn't been to the clubs. I only went to one stand-up gig before I started doing stand-up. A friend of mine took
Right.
me to a club in London, and I'd known her. We'd known each other since we were 13, and we were very old friends. And she took me to this club to see some comedy. And at the end of the gig, we walked out of the gig, and she said, "What do you think?" And I just did that kind of typical male thing where I went, "Yeah, it was all right. I could do that." And just kind of, just brushing it off. But how much effort and talent these people had just meant nothing to me, because I was that up my own self. And she ran me up about 3 weeks later. My friend Charlotte, she rang me up and she said, "Right, you put your money where your mouth is. I've booked you a 5 minute open spot. So if you think you could do it, you go and do it." And that was my first gig. That's how I started.
Oh, that's terrifying and also very
Yes, it
cool.
is. It is terrifying. And the thing is, I don't remember that first gig at all because I was so overcome, I think, with fear that I don't remember much about it. Only that it went well. And so naturally, still being me, I thought I knew it all, and did a second gig. And to that into that gig, I invited loads of friends and family to that gig because clearly by now, after 15 minutes on stage, I'm a rising star, and I absolutely died a terrible stage death. And there are friends who went to that gig who even now still don't talk to me, and that was 30 years ago. I don't know if they're ever going to come round from the trauma of the whole thing, but that's how it is.
Um, one of the and Richard is a huge history of film buff, and one of the scenes in the book is Cary Grant, arsenic and old lace,
Yeah.
he has that bumbling, just completely overwhelmed thing that Bob Hope often had in the Road 2 movies. So
Yeah, definitely. It's that kind of screwball comedy as
yeah,
well, which I really adored, I still adore. And I wanted Richard to, like I say, there's an awful lot of me in Richard, but one thing I think when you're creating a character, you have to give them some kind of quirk. They have to have something that is outside of just what they're doing in the book. And I'm incredibly lazy. So what I did was I gave I gave Richard the same hobby that I have, which meant that I didn't have to do all the research. So when I'm writing, I have all of this at hand in my head already. So I know the references, I know all of that. So it just comes naturally that way.
yeah, I do a little of that. I teach history of film, so I
Oh,
will throw
right.
things in for my character of even though
Yeah.
she's only 19, it's like wasted youth watching movies, old movies.
Yes, of course. Well, I mean, that was my youth. So that's
Exactly.
and I love the idea also of and this is where Richard differs from me, is that he wants to see the world as a more innocent place than it actually is. So he sees the world through the prism of more of the films of the 30s and 40s, which were, cleaned up so much with the Hays Code and all of that, that you didn't actually have any reality in them. So to see the world through that prism, I think helps him survive.
Yeah, well, yeah, he needs to. He finds a lot of bodies.
Yes, he does. He needs an
He needs
outlet.
something. Okay, so let's talk about Follet Valley. Uh, that's kind of the tone for the whole series. Is it based on a real place? You've already answered that you kind of live there.
Well,
Um,
it is very much based on my B&B and the town that we live in. We live 3 kilometers outside a town called Celsus, which is the goat's cheese, the famous goat's cheese. And yeah, it's basically the whole geography of the place is based around there as well.
all right. So what things do you keep exactly how they are? What things do you exaggerate? Are there things that like are sacrosanct that you aren't allowed to like mess with because people will
Um,
call you out?
I don't think so. I don't think the thing is, it's such this area is so French. And I mean that in a, I mean that in a low, I mean that as a compliment. Okay. I am French now, so I can say, these are my people. I can say this. It is such a French area. it is very rural. It is very much, about French farmers and market day and animals just roaming around everywhere and everything stopping for lunch. Work stops at dinner time or before dinner time. You'll have wine at lunch, and then you'll carry on. You know, you'll see people in the bars at 6 o'clock in the morning having a stiff cognac before they go to work. It is so stereotypically French that to exaggerate it would actually detract from what it is. There's no need to do that. There's no need to exaggerate it at all. And but as for how the neighbors feel about it, I don't. Do you know? I don't really know because I had the first book in the Follet Valley series was called Death and Croissant, and the rights to that were bought by a French publishing house, and I knew that they'd bought the rights, but I heard nothing from them for months. And then I got an email from Amazon.fr, which is the French Amazon. And the French Amazon sent me an email saying there's a book coming out in a couple of months that may interest you. And I clicked on it, and it was my book. I had no idea that they'd got that far. They completely changed the title. I mean, half the title's in French. It was called Death and Croissant, and they changed the title. They changed the title to Un crime à donner la chair de poule, which is a crime that gives you goosebumps, chicken skin. You know, that kind of the thing you get when you're cold or frightened.
Mhm.
So it completely ruined the title, completely changed the nature of the cover, which has been, I think it's been translated into 13 languages. Nobody has messed with the cover other than the French, which is a spectacularly French thing to do. Um, and bless them. So the French have read the first one. They're fine with it. They don't, you know, they don't see any issue. You know, if the thing is, and this is what I found by doing stand-up, because I've done stand-up in English and I've done stand-up in French to French audiences. And the very big major cultural difference between French comedy and English or American comedy is that English and Americans can laugh at themselves. The French cannot laugh at themselves. They take they take themselves very, very seriously in that respect. So if they thought that I was in any way mocking them, um, as you say, by exaggerating what there is rather than just reporting it, if you like, they would take against it, I think. But
Okay.
nobody has. Unless there's a pitchfork party of farmers waiting outside my house as we speak.
You never know. No, actually, that just it. I mean, you know, as an American reader, that just makes it all the more charming um, to know that
Yeah,
this, as you said, this is reporting on French
this
life.
is just where we are. This is just how it is. You know, there's no, you know, I think you mentioned it. There's a line which says that even death doesn't get in the way of French lunch.
Yeah.
Nothing gets in the way of French lunch. Nothing. You know, you get the 2 hours. There's normally 2 hours for lunch. People go home, they'll have a three-course lunch, and they'll, you know, I mean, when we first moved here, my youngest son, he was 4 when we moved here. He was our only son at the time, and he started. We went to the local school to say, look, when can he start the start of the next academic year? Because we've just moved here, so he wants to, you know, a few months to weeks to settle in. And the headmaster said, no, 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 that's not how it works. If he wants to come to school, he comes to school now. So literally, like 2 days after we'd moved to France, he was at this French school. Um, and he was four, but he was so he started school at 8 o'clock in the morning. He'd be there until I think it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But the great thing was that the school lunch, they'd have like three-course lunch, and then they'd have a siesta. They they'd put the 4-year-olds to bed after their big heavy lunch. I mean, I don't think they were served wine. It wouldn't surprise me if they were. But
Maybe.
it's just, I mean, it's just that is just France. If you made that up, people go, "Don't be ridiculous. Kids don't have three-course lunch and then go to bed at school." Of course, yeah, they do.
That actually sounds like heaven.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a good post-lunch nap.
I had one today. I feel much better for it.
Okay, so you have a twin towns between England and France, and
Yeah,
I know in Arizona we have some towns that have like sister cities, is
yeah,
what we
yeah.
call it. But what is the history and significance of these twin towns?
I'm not sure when it started, but I suspect it probably started after the Second World War when um, the idea of Europe having closer bonds with itself, each country having closer bonds with itself. So, for instance, you can drive into a lot of towns in all over Europe, and as you drive in, it'll say "Welcome to Bienvenue wherever," and it'll list the towns in different countries that it has these kind of twinning relationships with, which is a kind of tourism thing, it's a kind of trade thing. When I was growing up in the UK, the twin town for us was a place, actually, it was in France called Saint-Max-en-l'École, and we did a French exchange with the school in that town. So it's that kind of connection between the two that you have these. I don't think there's much happening other than bureaucrats meeting up once a year and getting drunk over a decent meal. But I mean,
I really need to go to France right now, so
exactly. Politicians know what they're doing. That's what I reckon. They know how to find an easy beer or wine somewhere. So there's quite a lot of that going on, and I found it a good way of introducing characters as well.
yeah, yeah, you have that. Was it Angelthorpe?
Angle Anglethorpe Spa. Yes, a made-up town in Lincolnshire in the northeast of England. Yeah,
Works really well. We talked about that. Okay, so all of the characters are, of course, seen through Richard's eyes, and
yeah.
which makes sense because he's you. Uh, and he is an expat, and it is a different kind of. So, does this point of view like limit what you can do with the French countryside, or is it just one more perspective that you can add?
I don't know. It's an interesting thing that it just felt really natural to see everything through Richard's eyes. That everything that happened would happen. That he would have to see everything that he knew about that was happening. And part of that, for instance, if you describe the countryside, like I said, although Richard is a kind of a real curmudgeon about the place, he absolutely loves where he is. So he describes it probably with more love than even a local would. So that kind of comes through. You get the good and the bad through Richard, but also he's this kind of maypole where everybody else is dancing around him and tying him in knots. So I like to think that all the angst has to be seen through Richard's eyes. There is a chapter in the first book, Death and Croissant, which is through Valerie's eyes, just as a way of introducing her a little bit better.
Mhm.
Um, but since then, no, it's all through Richard. I find it quite, I find it an easier way to write that kind of book. I realize that, there's certainly it's come back into fashion. I think that a lot of crime authors do so many very short chapters, and they're all from each protagonist's point of view, which is all well and good, and I think that's very good. It does work in some aspects, but it wouldn't work for me. It doesn't work as I write.
Yeah, I think it works well for suspense, novels
Yeah.
as things are built
Yeah.
up towards each other. But
And also, as a way of getting information across and as a way of getting a story across, if everything's seen through Richard's eyes, every now and then he has to sit down and take stock of the situation, which
what
helps
you
the reader because you as a writer yourself, you'll know that you get halfway through a book, you go, right, I have to recap here, not just for me as an author, but for the reader as well, so they know where
it's
we
like,
are.
wait, what's
So
happening? And I
exactly.
love
Yeah.
that Richard does that with his chickens. The scenes
Yes.
of him in the hen house with his chickens named after these Hollywood movie stars. I kept having to stop and read sections out loud to my husband because I would be laughing and he'd be like, "What?" And like, you just have to hear this.
He loves his hens. I've got hens as well. I don't spend as much time in my hens as Richard does with his. I
That's
don't.
probably
I try not to rely on them for advice. It's which would be another difference between me and Richard. But having said that, I do that with my dog. So that's the way it works.
well, they're smart, those dogs.
They're smarter dogs. I do. I love dogs. I love all animals. And since we've been here. My wife has adopted so many rescue animals over the years that we had this constant revolving door of needy beasts.
So has one of them been a goat, just since you're in the goat cheese capital?
We had three goats.
Three?
They all passed away in the same week recently, very
Oh,
weirdly. Very weirdly. It was almost this may end up in a book kind of weird
yeah.
because the three goats, two of them were brothers and the other one was just a little bit younger, who weirdly, I'll tell you the story. We already had the two goats, and then I was away doing some gigs somewhere for the weekend, and I came back after the weekend, and I very cleverly noticed that we didn't only have two goats anymore; we had three goats. And it turns out that my wife had been driving into town. See, this is rural France. This is why you can't, there's no point in exaggerating rural France. My wife was driving into town and this fella stopped her by the side of the road. He flagged her down and he said, "Do you want a goat?" Right. This happens in
Yeah,
France
that
all the time.
happens.
He said, "Do you want a goat?" And my wife said, "No, no, we've got goats, and my husband and the goats don't really get on, so we don't need any more goats." And he said to my wife, "Okay, that's fair enough. I'll eat this one then." And and
Now
my
we
wife
have three
said, "Right,
goats.
right, put him in the back." That's how we got our third goat.
Yeah,
Bizarre.
that line would have worked on me as well. It's like, no, 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 no. Oh, that's awesome. Do you want a goat? Uh, um, so what is one thing you missed most about the UK as an Englishman in France?
It's really difficult to answer that. It's really difficult to answer that. I've been trying to think of that because there isn't. I mean, right now, if you ask my wife what she misses about the UK, she'd say there's a certain type of biscuit called Garibaldi biscuits, and I brought her back three packets when I came home a couple of weeks ago from working in the UK, and she's eaten them all already. So she would she would probably say Garibaldi biscuit. There's nothing really. I think partly because I was looking for I'm working on another book now and it means reading some other books that I want to read um, for research, but also to see what's already been done and what hasn't been done.
Mhm.
And I'd love to just walk into a secondhand bookshop, um, and there just isn't that in rural France. Well, the nearest one to me is what an hour and a half's drive away, and I realize in Arizona terms that's nothing, but for us, for an hour and a half away from us, and it's a very small English section anyway. So I really missed that. I really miss a secondhand bookstore. I could go to Paris, of course, but that's getting on the train, and it also means mixing with Parisians, and I just don't have the energy.
So I first saw you speak at the Crime Fest last year in Bristol, and you had said something about Parisians. I don't do French. I'm sorry. Barely do English. Um,
Neither do Parisians.
are different from the rest of the French, and I was just wondering.
Yes,
Uh,
completely different. I think I think all kind of major cities, the inhabitants and those who are natural to the bigger city, Londoners, Parisians, maybe New Yorkers, they're regarded as very different. You know, they're regarded. I mean, and the Parisians see themselves as superior to everybody else in the country, and they have that, and they carry that with them outside of Paris. And they're almost kind of regarded, therefore, as not being proper French by the rest of the country, if you see what I mean. That they're not really French. They're not like us. They don't dress like us. They don't, they don't carry themselves the same way. So there is this kind of divide, which is ironic because I mean, where we live, we're a couple of hours drive south of Paris. So you get a lot of French, a lot of Parisians come down for the weekend and have their second homes here, and it's really interesting to see how they're treated. They're kind of not as warmly, almost as I was treated as this very eccentric Englishman when I first met. It's much better to be an Englishman in rural France than it is to be a Parisian. That's what I've worked out.
that's awesome. But yeah, definitely New Yorkers are a completely different breed from
Yeah, I
you.
think big cities breed that kind of thing anyway.
Yeah.
There's a pace that everything has to be 100 miles an hour, and what is regarded as maybe the rest of the country as rudeness, it's not necessarily rudeness. It's just that look, I've got literally 45 seconds to speak to you before I need to cross that street or it goes red. All of that.
Mhm.
Um, so there is that difference. There's always that divide, I think.
Well, I even in within Arizona, I've moved from the big city, which Phoenix metropolitan area, and now I'm up in the mountains where I grew up, and even that is just totally different pace, totally different
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
people. Everybody's so much friendlier. It's yeah,
It's
you can
a it's
tell
a
that.
real it's a very difficult thing to try and live the two lives like that. Like when I was doing stand up every weekend in the UK and going back, traveling through Paris normally to London or a other big city, anywhere in the world. I was working all over the world. And the sort of ferocious pace that the big cities have to go to, and then coming back here, there's a genuine culture shock between the two.
Yeah.
And I really found it at times. I found it hard to deal with, and then just as because I was like 3 days, 3.5 days in rural France and 3.5 days away on the road, I was like I'd like just get used to one thing and then have to go back and get straight into the other, and it's not easy.
No, that's exhausting. That is. My parents still live in the valley, so I still go down to see them, and it's, it's I'm like, how can people drive on these freeways? It's so fast, it's so crazy. People jamming by you going a million miles an hour, and yeah, it's
It is hard. The last two
picture
times
shock,
I've
like you
driven back to
said.
the UK, is I've been involved in road rage just because I'm pootling along like some rural Frenchman on in swaying all over the road. Just it's a different world. It's a completely different world.
All right. So, would you, I have heard that your series was picked up as a TV option. Would you like to talk about that at all? Or
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's happening, but I tend to get snippets of information and news that come through about casting ideas and things like that. But it's such a slow process, and it's something that um, I've learned over the years from being a stand-up that you are dangled carrots all the time and so few of them are actually ever end up in reach. So I mean, although I'm incredibly pleased that it has been picked up, you know, the producer is and the publisher, they're both very optimistic that it will get made. I'm trying to keep my feet on the ground. I'm trying to remain realistic about these things, but it is exciting. It is, of course, it's exciting, you know, and it
Well,
will make a big difference to the books as well if it were to come off.
yeah, oh yeah, and it would be it would be so popular.
I think so, and I think you know, and the reason why I wrote the books is that I wanted to read something that I wanted to write something that I wanted to read, and I wanted to write something that puts a smile on people's face. And I think that a kind of comedy drama based on the books it's just nice, light, warm viewing, you know. And I think we need a lot of that in the world right now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, yeah, do keep us updated
I will
yeah.
as much as I can. Yes.
Because I'm like, well, is it out yet? I think they picked it up after your first book.
They did, yeah.
That's incredible.
They've had the TV rights for 4 years now. So and they renewed the TV rights after the third year. So like I say, I keep getting snippets of information, like, you know, I'll get a vague text at 3 o'clock in the morning that says, "Oh, the budget's in place," and you go, you wake up and go, "That's good, that's good, that's good, that's what I needed right now." And you know, and we're talking to this broadcaster and we're talking to this company. See, the thing is with television now as well, is that you have to get so many different companies involved so that you get the finance, that getting all those ducks in a row, as it were, is such a difficult process. So it's just about I think it will be done, but I'm just being patient, which is not something I'm renowned for, but I'm trying my best.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's like when people see the opening credits on something and it's like this production company with this production company
Yes,
and with
absolutely.
this product. I don't think people realize what all of those various pieces do. And yeah, it's a heck of a
That's right.
process.
That's right. And you if you look at something even like Only Murders in the Building, which has massive stars, the number of producers and executive producers whole thing together it's an army now. It really is. So it's you know, to get something the first stage obviously is somebody buys the rights to the book, but the second stage after that of actually getting the green light for production is the really difficult bit, I think.
Yeah.
But like I say, I keep getting information about casting and stuff. See, my wife was never very keen on the character of Richard, because because, because I didn't realize when I wrote it just how much of myself I put into it. You see, it was like I said, it was just a way for me not to actually kill the guests in my own bed and breakfast. So I was just writing this thing, and I gave it to my wife to read after I'd finished the first draft, and she was furious. She because the story of Richard, if your listeners don't know, Richard, like I say, runs this B&B, but his marriage has fallen apart, and he's living alone. And this very exotic French woman, Valerie, who eventually becomes his detective partner, comes into the situation. So my wife read this, and she said, "So let me get this straight. Your character's an Englishman who runs a B&B in rural France. His marriage has fallen apart, and an exotic French woman arrives in his life. This is just your bloody fantasy, isn't it?" She was absolutely furious with the whole thing. So she's never really liked the books, and she doesn't like Richard. And then the producer, who bought the rights to the book, rang up a few months ago, and he said Jude Law wants to read the script, and he's interested in playing Richard. And I told my wife this. Now, finally, she
Now she's
likes
on board.
Richard. Finally, she's on board with the whole Richard thing.
Oh, that would be amazing.
That would get it greenlit very quickly, I would have thought.
Yeah. But again, well, carrot, Jude
Yeah,
Law
exactly. Exactly.
carrot.
Exactly. I'm not running around with champagne just yet.
Yeah.
Well, I run around with champagne every day actually, because that's where
Karen.
I am. But you know, I haven't got an extra bottle.
So what is next for Richard and Valerie and for you?
I am just at the moment plotting the next one, which comes out next summer. And that the provisional title for that is Death on the Island of Deja Vu. That is what I'm working with now. So, and there's quite a lot of Agatha Christie film references in that. So I'm doing a lot of research on the actual book side of things for that. And then I've got my second memoir comes out next week. Um,
Congratulations.
next week. It's a reissue that I wrote two memoirs about 12 years ago about an English comic living in rural France and the difference between the life on the road and the life in rural France. And they've been reissued under different titles. So C'est la vie, it's called, and that's coming out next week. And then I write another series, a more serious crime series around a Judge Lombard, who's an English, half French investigating magistrate, like a district attorney
Okay.
in France. And the third one of those comes out in October. So
And, and you also
it's
do you,
busy.
yeah, oh yeah, you're really do you also do your own audiobooks? Do you read them?
I do for the Follow Valley. Yes, I do all the audio books for those, which are great fun to do.
Oh, but it's
I
so
just done
exhausting.
Death and Ball. It is, but I mean, I finally found a way where I enjoyed it because I recorded the first one in lockdown. So I recorded it in my office, and it was just me in my office and trying to so this makeshift studio, and then I did a lot of the editing as well. And this may sound strange coming from a stand-up comedian, but I really don't like the sound of my own voice. So but having to read a 10-hour book and then edit the 10-hour book and then re-listen to the 10-hour book, I really hate the sound of my own voice now. So after the first three of those, I threw an incredible Mariah Carey style hissy fit with the publisher and said, I just can't do it like this anymore. I need help doing this. So I actually went into the studio with Death and Ball, and it was a much more enjoyable experience for me, and took a lot of pressure off having, proper engineers and directors with me.
Yeah, I've done two short stories and had a proper director, producer. And um the biggest thing for me was, okay, do it again and slow down.
Yes, I know, I know. Could we just,
And slow down.
could you just read that paragraph again? The third in. Could you just stress the third in for me? Thank you. Oh,
But still, it does take all the
it's
pressure off because it was like,
it does.
otherwise
It
I'd be
does.
rolling around and then have to slow way down.
Yes, exactly. And also because there's lots of characters and they all have to have, distinct voices, that it's you get very paranoid if you're on your own that you have mixed up entirely the accents. So to have a director with you to say, no, 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 this is a woman talking, what are you doing? Obviously obviously improves the quality of the audiobook.
That's awesome. All right. So finally, tell us about where our fans can find you, your social medias, website.
I am Mr. Social Media. If there's a social media I'm not on, can somebody let me know and and I'll join it. Toot sweet. I'm on all the social media, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, X occasionally, and I'm generally Ian Moore author. That's how you'll find me.
Yeah.
And I just posted something. Actually, I just posted. I was reading an excerpt of Death and Bull because I've been nominated for an award by the Mystery Writers of America. So I'm coming over to New York for the ceremony at the end of this month.
Oh, congratulations.
Um,
That's amazing.
yeah, I am so chuffed. It was one of those things that I was writing another book, and in that, you know what it's like when you're writing and you're carrying the plot, and you get to the end of your working day, and you just cannot think of anything else. So everything just kind of glides off you, and so I got this email and I read it, and oh, I've been nominated for an award. Okay, that's good. And then I just like 2 o'clock in the morning, kind of shot up out of bed, jumping up and down, going, I've been nominated.
I
What? What
cannot.
is this? What is this madness? And so yeah, so I'm so I'm so pleased, and that's the nomination is for the second one in the Follet Valley series, and that is Death and Fromage, which is the basic storyline of that is that a murder occurs after a Michelin-starred chef accidentally serves vegan goat's cheese as opposed to the real thing, and therefore murders occur. And if anybody thinks that that's unrealistic, then you really need to come to rural France and see how strongly they defend their ware.
Same thing in England with the vegetables. I've
Yes,
yes,
yes, absolutely
definitely
right.
something you can murder over. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, very busy day with all these books coming out and nominations. That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Thank you, Sharon.
And thank you everybody for being here for Blackbird Writers Presents Author Interviews.